I was just reading a book. All of a sudden I heard a guy screaming. I turned around and the guy sitting right next beside me was standing up and stabbing another guy with a Rambo knife.
Sways in the sun, keeping our stories in its motion. Lies the truth about us.
Tim McLean was born on October 3rd of 1985 in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. He grew up near Winnipeg in the agricultural area of Ely, Manitoba. He was known as a warm individual who wasn't shy about meeting and accepting new people. Tim was the kind of person who made friends with strangers and gelled with people easily. He added significant value to any group he accompanied, and he was well loved by friends and family.
Still kept stabbing him. Everybody got off the bus.
It didn't take much consideration to like Tim McLean, and after you started liking him, falling for his eccentric personality was inevitable. It's true, Tim McLean was highly likable, and he wasn't the type to dislike anyone. He saw the good in people and accepted everyone for who they were. Tim's uncle Alex McLean describes his nephew as a little guy with a big heart. Tim spent his life traveling and meeting new people, but unfortunately, traveling and an unanticipated encounter with a stranger on a bus would savagely halt the life of gentle Tim McLean on July 30th of 2008. I should warn you, this story is barbaric, and it's going to get very gruesome. If you found any of the disturbing truths videos hard to take, then I strongly suggest you skip this one. This situation gets bad. Proceeding beyond this point is entirely up to you. Choose now, and if you decide to go forward, take a deep breath first, and remember, you won't get another warning. I'm Mr. Black, and this is the disturbing truth of the devil on bus 1170. Tim was a 22-year-old Carnival employee heading back home from work. He boarded Greyhound bus 1170 at about 12:01 p.m. He seated himself by the window toward the back of the bus. He had been working in Alberta and was exhausted after a night out. It would be about a 22-hour ride before he'd get home, so Tim brought some music and headphones with him to keep him company during the long journey. At 6:55, the bus made a stop in Erickson, Manitoba. A 40-year-old Chinese immigrant named Vince Lee boarded. The tall man was wearing sunglasses and swiftly took his seat near the front of the bus. He was traveling from Edmonton, Alberta. At about 8 p.m., the bus pulled into a rest stop where Vince Lee reportedly got out to have a smoke. When he reboarded the Greyhound, he headed for the back of the bus in the direction of Tim McLean. Vince eyed everyone in every seat as he slowly made his way back. Tim was sitting in the second row from the back in the window seat. The aisle seat to his left was vacant. When Lee made eye contact, Tim flashed a friendly smile and gestured for Lee to feel free to have a seat next to him. Lee sat down, and Tim leaned against his window with headphones on as he peacefully drifted off to sleep. Up to this point, Vince Lee's behavior was described by most of the other passengers as completely unremarkable. Most of them. But we'll get to that. Lee was quiet as others recalled and not perceived to be much of a threat. Then someone across the aisle began to notice a shift in his demeanor. He started fidgeting, then he began muttering something in a low voice. It was some kind of Chinese chant. It was strange, but it wasn't overly alarming. Nothing was. Until Vince Lee pulled a large Bowie knife out of his backpack and quickly stabbed an unaware and unconscious Tim McLean in his neck. Tim was shocked back to reality in a screaming panic. He tried to fight back, but Vince Lee, as if some kind of glitching morbid machine of murder, repeatedly stabbed Tim over and over and over again, non-stop. Passengers panicked. People screamed for the driver to stop the bus as they rushed for the front door in a terrified frenzy of horror. At this time, Vince had pulled Tim to the aisle floor and continued to stab him without mercy. The driver slammed on the brakes, bringing the bus to an emergency stop. The passengers frantically rushed through the front exit as the bus driver and 2 others attempted to rescue Tim. But Lee was enraged. When they got near him, he slashed wildly in their direction with the bloody knife. They too exited the bus in accordance with their own safety necessities. It's believed that Civil Tim McLean was probably dead at this point. It's something that at very least we can hope for, especially considering what happened next. As the 30-plus once passengers of Greyhound Bus 1170 stood on the side of the Trans-Canada Highway about an hour west of Winnipeg, they watched as absolute horror unfolded on the bus before them. With the massive knife he'd just used to stab Tim countless times, Vince Lee began to saw and hack at the neck of McLean's lifeless body. After a while, Lee stood up to his feet with the bloody knife in one hand and Tim's head in the other. People fainted. They screamed hysterically. Some others couldn't hold it back and vomited beneath themselves. Teenagers from the bus began trying to get videos with their phones while younger children cried as they witnessed a trauma that would undoubtedly mark them for the rest of their lives. A trucker driving through the area stopped and helped the fearful people defend themselves with crowbars and hammers. Then suddenly Lee began to make his way toward the front of the bus. But the driver, the trucker, and another passenger acted quickly, attempting to close the bus door, blocking Vince Lee from leaving the Greyhound or attacking more people. And just as the door slammed shut, like something out of a horror movie, Vince's knife-armed hands shot through the slit in the door and brandished wildly at the people on the other side. They quickly evaded the scene to put distance between them and the crazy man on the bus. They were uncertain as to what would happen next. Would Vince get out and come for them? They were sure he would. But he never came out. Law enforcement were en route, but they were nowhere near the now bloody crime scene. While people outside could do nothing but wait and watch, Lee paraded Tim's decapitated head up and down the aisle of the bus, showing it off like some kind of sick trophy. And then, with still no sign of the police, Lee's actions on board the Greyhound intensified. He cut open Tim's chest and tore out his organs. He took out Tim's heart, his lungs, his liver, and finally ripped out his intestines. He took these items and strung them out all over the bus, and still the other passengers could do nothing but watch in shock. But it wasn't over. In full line of sight, Vince Lee devoured both of Tim's eyes and 1/3 of his heart. He then cut off Tim's nose and ears. He taunted his audience by smelling the severed parts and licking Tim McLean's blood off his own fingertips. Lee had also brought plastic bags with him. These were for storing the pieces he'd cut off. He actually planned to take parts of his victim with him. It was haunting. It was cruel. It was unthinkable in every way. The passengers outside the bus were witnessing what can only be described as malignant evil. At around 9 p.m., authority and emergency services arrived in bulk and immediately contained the scene while attempting to reason with Vince Lee, but negotiations proved to be fruitless. It was no use. Vince Lee simply wouldn't comply. He stated, "I have to stay on this bus forever," and then continued to dissect Tim McLean for hours. Non-present SWAT team members later critiqued the attending officers for not taking Lee out and putting an end to the situation sooner. And call me cruel, but I agree. Lee was armed. He'd already killed, decapitated, cut up, and ate a guy. He was dangerous and threatening, but some do-gooders believed he was deranged and shooting him would have been unjust and unnecessary. Well, I suppose if you take a moment to really think about it, shooting Lee wouldn't have done anything more than leave a ton of unanswered questions for the poor McLean family and the rest of the traumatized passengers on Bus 1170. At about 1:30 a.m., after hours of the police seemingly getting nowhere, Vince Lee finally made a run for it after breaking out one of the windows on the bus. But it was over quickly as he was met on the other side by the shock of a police taser and the gnashing teeth of a heroic K-9 officer. The crime scene was finally analyzed as the traumatized witnesses were questioned. Tim's nose, ears, and tongue were all found in Lee's pockets. Lee, who injured himself in the killing and cannibalizing of Tim McLean, was taken straight to the hospital to treat his injuries. I know, very Jesus of them. But it's standard protocol. Treat injuries first. As anger-triggering as it seems, it too makes more sense than our emotions initially allow us to realize. The threat at the time was neutralized. Preservation of the well-being of Vince Lee was the only thing that was going to lead to answers. So at that point, officers were simply abiding by policy, and that was the right thing to do. Greyhound representatives had to take the passengers to a local store and replace their clothes because everything on the bus was now evidence. Then at 3:30 p.m. the next day, the exhausted passengers finally arrived home in Winnipeg to the worried arms of their loved ones. Tim's mother, Carol, was informed by her ex-husband that Tim would not be coming home. She reportedly learned what happened on the bus the night before while listening to the radio. She prayed over dinner that it wasn't her son. She was understandably devastated beyond conceivable belief. Some of the passengers from Bus 1170 have never recovered from what they saw that day, and I imagine they never will. Not fully. How on earth could you? Even some of the cops and emergency responders that day still haven't shaken off the post-traumatic effects of what they saw. And all Tim McLean's family could do was pray and push for justice to be served to the evil devil on that bus that destroyed their angel. Imagine for a second that that was your family member. How could you process this? What would you want to happen to Vince Lee? And what would happen to Vince Lee? Why did he do what he did? And just who the hell is he? Lee came to Canada in 2001 with a computer science degree. At one point, he worked for a church doing small jobs to support himself and his wife. He became a Christian and was baptized around this time. The pastor claims he had no complaints about Lee. Then in 2004, Lee was reportedly hospitalized after problems with law enforcement, but not much else is known about this incident. Then Vince was a forklift driver for a time, while his wife was a waitress. He reportedly had no trouble working this profession either. Nevertheless, he quit in 2005. Over time, his marriage deteriorated into a separation, but the cause for that is unknown. In 2006, Lee started working for Walmart while also delivering newspapers on the side. Then 4 weeks before Lee got on Bus 1170, he was terminated from his job in Walmart due to problems with another employee. He then went to Winnipeg for a job interview on July 28, 2008. On July 29th, Lee got off the bus in a town called Erickson. He had 3 pieces of luggage with him. Witnesses claim he spent the night outside on a bench staring up into space for hours. The next day, he sold his brand new computer to a child for $60. It was confiscated by police, who in turn bought the boy another one in exchange for his honesty. These are the events that led Vince Lee to Bus 1170 and the brutal assassination of Tim McLean. Medical reviewers seem to indicate that Vince was an undiagnosed schizophrenic who may have not been prescribed the correct medication for his condition. I'm not sure the direct truth here, but there is one thing we know. And that's that Vince Lee was not taking any medication the day he boarded Bus 1170. Everyone from law enforcement and the defense, to the judge and the prosecutor, unanimously agreed that at the time of the crime, Vince Lee was clearly not of sound mind. And I have to agree. That much is obvious. But what they did was ridiculously conclude the case without regard for the unwavering trauma this event caused the people who witnessed it. And what's worse, Tim McLean's family reportedly didn't even get a word in. Apparently, there was no open trial. The court decided not to call upon the traumatized witnesses or the McLean family, and Vince Lee claimed he wasn't criminally responsible due to mental illness. The judge relied on testimony from forensic psychiatric witnesses that, reportedly, never actually witnessed the madness that unfolded on Bus 1170. They were never even at the scene of the crime. And so the judge ruled Vince Lee not criminally responsible due to psychosis caused by schizophrenia that, I guess, had gone untreated. And he was sent to Selkirk Mental Health Center for an indefinite amount of time for treatment and monitoring. There they spent time rehabilitating Vince Lee and reportedly even aided him in changing his name to Will Baker. There has been no justice for the McLean family, or the witnesses of what happened to Tim on Bus 1170. They were closed out from the trial of a monster that took away pieces of them by removing and eating parts of an innocent man. But they didn't get a say. I guess what they witnessed wasn't important enough to be considered because some quacks in a coat had a theory that overruled their testimony. They should have at least been allowed to voice their opinion. But it was done this way, and I guess it avoided a painstakingly lengthy trial. And after all, Vince Lee will never get out, right? And those psychiatric facilities can be worse than prison, right? Everyone's safe from Vince Lee now, right? Once the experts started working with Lee, they began filming hours of videos and keeping transcripts while interviewing him about what happened on Bus 1170. He said, "God made me do it. I was an evil son of an evil God. God chose me as the killer, and God chose Tim as the victim. God controls all things, and God made me do it." I don't know, Vince. That's not very Jesus of any God, not even an evil one. After they stabilized Lee's meds, they determined that while he clearly wasn't in a normal state of mind when he committed the crime, he wasn't completely out of it either. Vince knew what he was doing, and he remembered every gruesome detail. Over time, they began testing the water by giving Lee certain amounts of freedom while also adjusting his medication. And after a while, it seemed like his brain could function in a normal state, and they determined that Lee was capable of integrating back into society. In June of 2010, 1.3 years after his trial absolved him of criminal responsibility for the murder of Tim McLean, Vince Lee began supervised release. And 2 years after that, in 2012, he began to leave the hospital unsupervised for short visits. And oh wait, it gets better. By 2015, he was living in a halfway house where the only thing they fully controlled were his meds. And then came the swift kick in the balls. On February 10th of 2017, murdering cannibal Vince Lee was declared fully stable and capable of functioning independently. This included the ability to maintain and regulate his own medication. Yeah, I'm not kidding. But on the bright side, a psychiatrist stated that Lee only had a 0.8% chance of having a relapse. I wonder what the chances were when he saw Tim on that bus. He beheaded and ate a man in public on a Greyhound. He got on the bus with plastic bags and a weapon, knowing full and well what he intended to do that day. And I can hear the do-gooder comments already. But he was sick. Sure. No shit. But guess what? I don't care. What Vince Lee did isn't something that anyone with mental illness would vouch for. Mental illness is very real and it's heartbreaking. But this is beheading and heart-eating. And it's forever altered the lives of so many people, including the children that saw what happened that day. So don't dare attach this to the mental illness that people bravely face and fight around the world every day. You're the same type of person that says mental illness shouldn't be stigmatized, and I agree, but evil, murderous, cannibalistic rages don't get to scapegoat on the back of it. And hey, I checked on WebMD. Cannibalism. Not a typical side effect of schizophrenia. So sit down and shut up. You get sympathy from me when you have a real mental illness for sure. But once you go Cujo on someone, you're no longer human to me. You need to be put to sleep or locked up in a cage until sleep finds you, depending on the situation. I mean, I know it's not black and white. But when you kill and eat someone, I'm all for them treating you. They can work with you there in your cage. That's fine. And maybe they'll learn something helpful. But you should never be allowed out once you cross that unforgivable line. I agree fully with Tim's mother Carol on this topic, only she's much nicer than me. She said, Lee has an incurable disease that makes him do terrible things. I believe he needs to be in an institution that addresses those needs. I don't think it matters if you're mentally ill or not. If you kill someone, you should lose your freedom. Period. She also later stated, I need for Vince Lee and people like him to remain in a locked facility where they can make sure they get their medications, where they're being treated for their mental illness. They're treated with compassion, but the rest of the public is kept safe. That's what I need to move forward, carry on. I'll never get my son back regardless of what I do or what I've done already. You see, we need to remember something. Carol and Tim Sr. never got to say goodbye to their son because his body was so badly damaged, and part of it ended up in the belly of someone else. And I think in a situation like this, the victims, their families, and the protection of the rest of the public is what matters the most. And you would think that everyone would agree with that. Yet Vince Lee is a free man walking around with no criminal responsibility for his past actions. Like killing and cannibalizing a man on a bus in front of over 30 people never even happened. It's everyone else that bears the burden of carrying around what Vince Lee did on bus 1170. Meanwhile, he can potentially skip a couple doses and do it all again at any moment. So again, you can treat him. You can learn from him. But knowing what he's capable of if he stops taking his medicine should be enough to keep him locked up for life in a medical facility. Chris Somerville, CEO of the Schizophrenia Society of Canada, met with Vince Lee several times. After a while, he had this to say.
The media was more favorable to the McLean family because the country has entered a period of tough-on-crime with very little attention being paid to restorative justice, rehabilitation, recovery and redemption or the role of mental illness in this unfortunate incident.
He also stated,
It is remarkable the positive effects of the medication. Up to 25% of people who will have a psychotic break with reality will never experience another psychotic episode. Up to 65% will experience a degree of recovery in order to live a meaningful life. 10% will take their life by suicide due to the losses associated with schizophrenia. Of the 300,000 people in Canada who live with some form of schizophrenia, the vast majority lead quiet, law-abiding lives hoping for some quality of life. People living with schizophrenia are more likely to be victims of violence rather than being perpetrators of violence.
Oh, that's just magical. I agree with Chris. Genuinely. I can see where he might be right. Under one condition. He should give Vince Lee room and board in his house for a few years where he sleeps, for close observation. And no cheating by locking your bedroom door at night. There's a point of no return when it comes to your actions. You've probably heard me say it before, but even if you're insane, and regardless of mental illness, Vince Lee's intentions on bus 1170 went well beyond that point. He didn't slap somebody in the middle of a mental breakdown or a seizure. He did stuff you'd only see in a movie like Hostel. And sometimes we must look at actions. In my opinion, what Vince Lee did to Tim McLean on bus 1170 was pure evil. Lock him up. My heart goes out to the McLean family, the traumatized witnesses, especially the children, the law enforcement and medical responder units, and last but not least, innocent Tim McLean. Rest in peace, and may you never be forgotten. I'm Mr. Black, and this is the disturbing truth.
I was just reading a book. All of a sudden I heard a guy screaming. I turned around and the guy sitting right next beside me was standing up and stabbing another guy with a Rambo knife, pretty much. It was a big survival knife like this in the throat, repeatedly. Told everybody to get off the bus. Everybody started to get off the bus. The guy still kept stabbing him. Everybody got off the bus. Me and a trucker that had stopped and the Greyhound driver ran up to the door to maybe see if the guy was still alive or we could help or something like that. And when we all got up, we seen that the guy was cutting off the guy's head. He was cutting off the guy's head there. And he saw us. He came back to the front of the bus, told the driver to shut the door. He pressed the button and the door shut, but it didn't shut in time, and the guy was able to get his knife out and take a swipe at us, so we backed off the door, and I ran around the backside of the bus driver took off, and then we both returned to the front to see what had happened, and he hadn't gotten off the bus. The door was still open. We shut the bus door that time and shut it. It was at that point that he came, started walking to the front of the bus, and he had the head in his hand, and he just looked at us like this and dropped it on the ground, like totally calm. The three of us had weapons from the trucker's truck there, and we just stayed outside while he tried to get out the door, telling him, "No, stay put, stay there, don't try to come out." He tried to get the bus working. And the bus driver disabled the bus somehow in the back. I'm not sure how he did it. It was at that point, I think, that the police showed up and kicked us off, got us to the end of the bus there.
How were people reacting?
Some people were puking, some people were crying.
Were people running? Were they screaming?
Yeah, everybody was running, screaming off the bus. Like, when it happened, I think I was the first one to really realize what was going on and just screamed, like, "Stop the bus, someone's getting stabbed, everybody get the hell off." The people at the front of the bus didn't really understand what was going on, so it almost turned into like a trample scene there and everybody trying to get off the bus. But the guy, he didn't care at all. He wasn't concerned with anybody but the guy that he was stabbing.
What did the guy look like? Did you get a look at him?
The killer?
Yeah.
He's either Chinese or native. That's all I can say. 6 feet, 200 pounds, he's wearing sunglasses, bald head. He looked totally calm. He didn't say a word, I don't think, to anybody on the bus. I think he got out and had a cigarette with one girl. Nothing, just totally calm. The guy that he stabbed was listening to his headphones and sleeping. He didn't do anything to provoke the guy. The guy just took a knife out and stabbed him. Started stabbing him like crazy and cut his head off.
How are you feeling when you saw what was happening?
I got sick after I saw the head thing. I just wanted to help me and the driver wanted to get the guy stuck in the bus. And at that point, when we saw the head, we knew that the guy was dead, so.
Was he sitting next to him? Did it seem like they were traveling together?
Yeah, he sat right next to the guy that he killed.
Were they friends?
No, I don't think that they were at all. He didn't say anything when the guy got on the bus. I honestly don't think that the guy knew him at all. I think he was just really crazy.
So there were no words exchanged before?
Nothing.
No warning?
Nothing. No warning.
How are you feeling now?
A little tired. I'm in shock still, I guess. I still feel like maybe there was something, when that had happened, there was another kind of big guy beside me, and I told him, give me a hand, maybe we can, let's get this guy, but the other guy took off, and I wasn't, I feel really, really terrible for the guy that got killed. I mean, the poor guy, he didn't even see it coming, right? It's terrible.
Are you traveling alone?
Yes.
Where's all your stuff, all your bags?
Everybody's stuff's still in the bus. They put us here in the hotel. They just finished taking us to the police station to take all of our statements. We're still not sure how we're getting to our destination or what's going on with our luggage or what. But we're supposed to talk to a crisis unit here right now, and they got some food and drinks and the rooms for us for tonight.
Ever seen anything like this before? Ever been through anything like this before?
Nothing like that, no. I've never seen somebody decapitated.
Was he saying anything during your time?
Nothing. The guy was totally calm, and when he came and he brought the head and he looked at us and dropped the head, it was just like he was having a day at the beach. Like, he couldn't be bothered by anything else.
What did you arm yourself with? You said you found something.
The trucker had a big crowbar. I grabbed a hammer. I'm not sure what the driver had. He must have had something, otherwise he wouldn't have been there. And we were all just sitting there at the door waiting for that guy to come out.
Were you a soldier by any chance? Or a
I
former
was.
soldier?
Yeah, I was. I was in the military for 5 years.
Reg Force? Or was it?
Yeah.
What unit?
Santa RGC, but I don't want to get too far into that right now. But yeah, I was a soldier.
Sorry, you said what? You were infantry?
I was a combat engineer.
Is that right? Yeah. You never got to Afghanistan, did you?
No.
You're kind of the hero of the story, if you don't mind me saying.
Not me. I'd say that the trucker was. Really, that guy, when he showed up, I felt so much better. When he was there with that bar, he was bigger, and at that point it was like, hey, we got this guy.
Where did he come from? How did he
The trucker? I believe he was driving along the road, and when we had pulled over in a hurry, everybody had ran out of the bus. He had seen people running and figured that something was going on, so he pulled over right away. And what he told me after was that somebody screamed at him that he's got a knife, he's got a knife. So he went and got that bar.
Where were you sitting when it all started?
I was sitting just in the seat in front of the killer and the victim on the window.
On the front of the bus, or the middle of the bus?
It sits right at the back, right by the toilet. The killer was right in front of the toilet
So
seat.
you're in the very last seat of the bus.
Yeah.
Did the victim scream? Did he wake up? Did he yell?
Yeah, the victim was a blood curdling scream. Like that, just reading my book, and all of a sudden I heard it. It was like something between a dog howling and a baby crying. I guess you could say it was. I don't think it'll leave me for a while. After I don't know 5 or 6 stabs, I think he must have got him in the throat because we didn't hear him anymore.
Was there a lot of blood?
Yeah, there was blood everywhere. There was blood spurting. The floor of the bus is covered in blood.
Then did you turn around and find him?
Life is in a stream. The ocean called for you and me. Still, I'm in this game, but without my closest friend. Fear, it's leaving now. I waited here, but nothing came. So I close my eyes, 'cause you reflect in everything. It's shining through the light in you. It shines so true. The light in you.